UK Prime Minister David Cameron has just made one of the most important speeches of his career. In fact, it could be billed as one of the most important speeches that a British Prime Minister has made in a generation. Cameron has essentially called for a referendum on the country's position in Europe. Well, Simon Nixon was listening to this speech. Simon, basically he sought a mandate for renegotiation of the position ahead of the 2015 elections and then a referendum, if needed, in 2017. Is that right?
Well, he said that he will have a renegotiation if he's Prime Minister, and he will have a referendum in 2017 on the UK's membership of the EU.
Essentially, that's an in and out referendum. It's going to be a black and white decision here. We stay or we don't stay.
That's right, yes.
Is that very much change on what we were expecting from this speech?
No, it's pretty much what we were expecting, but it is a change from the position that, that Mr. Cameron had had up until now. Until now, the position of the government was that there would be a referendum if the relationship between Britain and the EU changed at some point in the future. It was sort of an open-ended referendum commitment, and that's on the statute book. What's happened here is that under intense political pressure from his own party, he has now agreed that he's now put a deadline on that referendum of 2017, and in order to try and persuade enough of his party to support him in a vote to stay in the EU, he's promised that there would be a renegotiation of membership before that referendum.
What's interesting, of course, is, okay, if they renegotiate their position, A, we don't know what the terms of the renegotiation are, and also whether or not the other members of the EU are willing to go ahead with that sort of renegotiation. I mean, they're all going towards a federalist state, essentially, but Britain wants to be hanging on the outside.
Well, there's a big gamble in here from Cameron. He is gambling that there will be an appetite, that in Europe there will be the need for treaty changes to create a more federal Europe. Now that is not entirely a view that's shared across Europe. I don't think necessarily that some people in Germany or elsewhere in Europe think that's necessarily the case, but anyway, that's what he's hoping, that there will be, and as a result of that there will be an opportunity for him to renegotiate some powers. But what he hasn't done in this speech is set out what exactly he wants to renegotiate, what the details are, and that's something that is going to become a big issue from now on.
I mean, it is quite interesting because, you know, you could say, okay, well, if the UK wants to leave, let it leave, but at the same time, I mean, the UK is fairly important within the EU as a whole. I mean, for example, it's Germany's largest trading partner. So, I mean, is it likely that the others will cooperate to a certain extent?
Well, I think that's, you know, again, what he's gambling here is that there will be a desire in the rest of Europe to keep the UK in, and that will provide enough political leeway for him to be able to renegotiate or to get some kind of deal that he can then claim is a renegotiation of British membership, and then use that as a pretext upon which to lead a referendum to stay in the EU. But of course, the issue is that that the rest of Europe will, you know, it's not clear how much. A, it's not clear what he wants, and B, it's not clear how much leeway he actually has. So he's gone into this situation
slightly blind.
Slightly blind, yeah.
Okay, what is interesting as well, of course, is would this be enough? Do you think the speech was enough to satisfy the Eurosceptics within his party, who essentially have forced him into this position?
Well, there's a hard core of Eurosceptics in his party for whom it is their political mission in life to take Britain out of the EU. So what they will concede here is that they have won a significant victory today because they've now got a firm commitment and a deadline for a referendum. They will now be working on trying to set the bar as impossibly high as they can for this renegotiation to try and now force Mr. Cameron into a position where they actually has to lead a campaign to take Britain out of the EU. That will now be what they will try and do. But they will certainly regard themselves as having had a significant victory today.
But perhaps more important than all of that is, what do you think the British people will say on this? I mean, what are the recent polls showing about whether or not British people think we should stay in the EU?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting because what's happened in the last few weeks even is that as this debate has started really heating up in the UK, the polls have sunk quite significantly. You know, 6 months ago, the opinion polls were showing that a significant majority in the UK would vote to come out of the EU. But as the debate has been joined, and business, finance, Britain's allies, America, Germany have entered this debate, the polls have shifted quite substantially, and now there is a small majority in favour of staying in the EU. And I think that this is one of the things that is influencing David Cameron's position on this, which is that I think that from my conversations with people, senior people in the government, it's clear that at the top of the government they don't actually think they could win a referendum to take Britain out of the EU. And one of the subtexts or the subliminal messages Cameron is trying to get out from this speech is that he is a pro-European, and it's quite clear that he is determined to try and engineer a situation where he can lead an in campaign.
As some people suggested, it was an incredibly pro-European speech, despite the fact he was at the same time calling a referendum.
Yes, he has been boxed into this position by people in his party who want people out of the EU, and so part of the mission of this speech was to try and paint himself as vividly as possible as a pro-European, while at the same time giving this important concession to his opponents.
Simon, thank you very much indeed.